Hello everyone, I'm Anita with AnitaByDesign.com and welcome back to the Beginner's Sewing course. Today we're starting lesson number 3. Last week in lesson number 2, I taught you guys how to lay out your pattern pieces and how to cut your fabric. So you should have all of your pattern pieces ready to go. Now you'll notice today I'm wearing this cute little purple t-shirt that says Prayers for Briley. Briley is the daughter of my friends Risa and Brian. She's 4 years old and she's battling a rare form of brain cancer. Briley is she's full of joy and they call her Briley Joy. She's a happy little girl. Even now while she's going through this, she keeps a smile on her face and she's just a lovely little girl. So I just want to ask you to join me in praying for Briley whenever you think of her. Now let's get into the tools, the supplies that you're going to need to start sewing. All right, you're going to need a pair of scissors, the tiny scissors or snips at your sewing machine, your point turner, your seam ripper, your seam gauge, your marking tools, pencils or markers, your straight pins. If you're using a knit fabric, you need ballpoint. If you're using a woven fabric, you need regular straight pins, your thread, and a bobbin. So let's get started. Okay, let's take a look at the sewing machine. Now this is the sewing machine that I'll be using, the Viking Husqvarna. All machines come with the same basic functions. However, the location of the components of the machine will vary. So let's take a look at the details of this machine, starting with the needle plate. This is the needle plate, and this is where you will be doing your sewing. On the needle plate, you will find these lines, and these lines are to help guide you as you're sewing to keep your stitches straight. Now, in the skirt that we'll be making, we're using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So you will locate the 5/8 inch line on your machine, and that's the line you will use to guide you in sewing. Right above your needle plate is your presser foot. And the presser foot is what is going to hold your fabric down onto the needle plate when you're sewing. And this long part here is called a shank, and this is what holds your presser foot on, or holds your presser foot. Now to raise and lower the presser foot, there's a lever in the back of your machine off to the right. Some machines may have it off to the left, but you would just pull it down to lower and just push it up to raise your presser foot. Now we will go ahead and take a look at the tension dial for the pressure dial for your presser foot. This is the pressure dial for my presser foot, and you'll notice there are numbers around the dial, 0 to 3. For regular sewing, I keep mine on a number 3. Whenever I want to sew a really lightweight fabric or do appliques or something of that nature, then I dial it down to a number 2. And if I'm sewing on fabrics that are like a stretch fabric, a chiffon, lace, or organdy, then I'll dial it down to a 1. And then 0 is for free motion sewing. So depending on the type of fabric that you're using, you will need to adjust your pressure dial for the presser foot. Moving down to this bottom area, you'll see this little part right here. This is my thread cutter. So when I'm sewing, I can take the thread and run it through here and it'll cut the thread for me. If you don't have a thread cutter on your machine, then you can just use scissors. If you have the tiny scissors or the snippers, you can use those at the machine, or just your regular fabric scissors or whatever you have to cut away the threads. And then below that is a lever to the back, and this is the buttonhole guide. And whenever you get ready to sew a buttonhole, after you position everything, you will pull this lever down, and that will help to guide you as you're sewing a buttonhole. Here in the sewing area is where you will find your sewing machine needle. Now, the type of needle that you use will be dependent upon the type of fabric that you're using. So there's a possibility that you may have to change your needle. So to change your needle, what you're going to do is there's a screw to the right of your needle. You're just going to loosen the tension on that screw, and pull down to release the needle. And then you want to install the proper needle. And to do that, first you need to know that the front side of the needle is rounded. The back side of the needle is flat. I don't know if you can see that, but that side is flat. The flat side of the needle needs to be facing the back of the machine. So you're going to take the needle and push it up into that chamber as far as it can go. Hold it and tighten the tension as far as it will go. And then you have a new needle installed. Now, let's talk about the different types of needles. There are many different types of sewing machine needles available on the market, but I'm going to show you just a few today. Starting with the universal needles. Now, you'll see at this top line is the company, the brand. I'm using the Schmetz needles, and I use these because they're what are available at my local fabric store. I'm not brand loyal yet. I just pick these up because that's what's at my store. Now, under the brand name is the type of needle, and you'll see it here. This is a universal needle, and below that you'll get 2 rows of numbers, and we will look at the bottom row. This is a 70-10, and we look at the first number, 70. This is an 80, and then you have multi sizes here. These numbers indicate the size of the needle. Okay, so the 70 would be your smaller needle, moving up to an 80, and then here we have a multi-pack, and it goes from a size 75 all the way up to 90. Now, the type of needle you will choose will depend on the type of fabric that you're using. And the size of the needle that you choose will depend on the thickness of that fabric. So if you are using a woven fabric and it's a lightweight woven fabric, you will go with a 70 or an 80. If you're using a denim, then, or let's not say denim because we have a different needle for that, but if you're using a thicker woven fabric, then you will go higher in your numbers. Now, moving down to your jersey ballpoint needles, these are the needles that you will use for your knit fabrics. And the point on this needle is rounded, so it doesn't tear away at your fabric, the threads that your fabric are made of, which causes runs in your fabric. Okay, and again, these come in different sizes, and you have your multi-packs. Then a couple of specialty needles I have here. One is the jeans needle, and this one is appropriate for your denim and similar fabrics, and it's really great for penetrating extra thick woven fabrics because of the point. It's pretty sharp. Okay, and then the other one I want to show you is the top stitch needle, and the top stitch needle is good for heavy fabric. If you're doing decorative stitches on the top of your fabric that are going to show on the outside, this is the needle you will want to use because it's really sharp and it'll penetrate through multiple layers of fabric. So this is what we have. There are many, many more, as I said before, on the market, but these are just a few of the choices. So you will go ahead and choose your needle based on the type of fabric you're using and the fabric weight that you're using. In addition to your sewing machine needles, you're going to need a hand sewing needle. Now, most of us already have these around the house, but if you don't, you may want to go ahead and purchase one. The hand sewing needles will be used to attach our yoke, the side fold of our yoke, to the zipper tape. And also, if you choose, you're going to be using the hand sewing needle to hem your skirt using a slip stitch. I am going to give you a choice of slip stitching or putting in a straight stitch when you get ready to hem your skirt. So make sure you have some hand needles handy for when that time comes. Now I'm going to show you guys the needle position button on my machine, and it's this button right above my needle plate. And what this does is it changes the position of my needle when I'm sewing. So if I press this button, my needle position goes down into the fabric, and if I press it again, the needle position goes up. And you'll see when we start sewing that we're always going to start before we start stitching, we're always going to start with the needle down in the fabric. Now, if your machine doesn't have a position button for your needle, then you're just going to use your hand wheel to lower the needle into your fabric. Moving up to the thread tension dial. A perfect stitch is created when the top and bottom thread have equal tension. Now my tension is set on a 4, and my tension dial goes from 0 to 9. Okay, but you'll notice that 3 through 5 have little squares around them, and according to my user's manual, those are the ones that are good for everyday stitching. So I hardly ever, I can't even remember a time when I've changed this thread tension dial. So I usually keep mine right here. Unless you have some stitching issues where your top thread or your bottom thread are getting all tangled up, you may have to adjust the tension. But before you do that, I would suggest going ahead and re-threading your machine before changing the tension. What you're looking at right now is the foot pedal for your machine, and this pedal is what drives your machine. So when you press down on the pedal with your foot, it operates the needle. And this pedal is plugged into your machine. Now let's take a look at the feed dogs of the sewing machine. The feed dogs are these little metal parts here that look like teeth, and they are what grab your fabric and feed it through the machine as you're sewing. Now there are times when you will have to disengage the feed dogs when you're sewing, and we'll get into that later when we have to actually do that. So when you press onto the foot pedal of your sewing machine, then the feed dogs move up and down. So let's demonstrate that right now. And those are your feed dogs. To thread your machine, you're going to have a spindle. Some machines come with a horizontal spindle and some machines come with a vertical spindle. My machine comes with both, and this is just an attachment, so I can remove it, and your machine may have the same thing. But I'm going to use the horizontal spindle, so I'll move that one. So remove your cap. Go ahead and place your thread on the spindle with the thread winding from the top, okay? Replace the cap, and when you place your cap, make sure you have room for that spool to move around. You don't want it tight because you may obstruct the function of the thread. So make sure you have room. And then the first thing we're going to do before threading the machine is we're going to wind the bobbin. And the bobbin, it looks like a tiny spool of thread, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to make a tiny spool of thread for the bobbin, and then I'll show you what the bobbin is for when we get into threading the machine. So you're going to take your thread and go in between the bobbin. There's a little hole on the top. So you're going to go in between and come up through that hole and pull the thread. From there, hold it. You're going to go ahead and wrap your thread around this little silver piece and make sure it's going around this direction. So wrap it around and come back over here, and you're going to place your bobbin on this little silver spindle here. After it's placed there, you're going to snap it over to this little stop, okay? Then what you're going to do is take your hand wheel, pull it out, and that will disengage the needle of your sewing machine, okay? Once you've done that, you're going to hit your foot pedal that comes with your machine. When you press onto your foot pedal, make sure you hold on to this thread until you have a good amount of thread wound around your bobbin. And then you're going to take your little scissors and cut off the top of that thread. Then you're going to continue winding, and what's going to happen is this little stop, this is a guide to stop your bobbin from winding when it's full. So you're going to wind until that's full. Once it stops, snap it back to the left, push your hand wheel back in, remove the bobbin, and just cut away the thread. Put that aside, and then we're going to thread the machine. Now, remove the thread from the silver stop. Then you're going to take your thread and you're going to place it under this little white part, and the arrow indicates which direction to go in, so you're going to just place it in there. And then we're going to take the thread and pass it through this chamber, going down, coming back up on the other side, and then we're going to loop it through the silver part and go back down into that same chamber, and then we're going to thread the needle. To thread your needle, you're going to take this thread and you're going to feed it through this silver hook. So you're going to go to the left of the hook and feed it from the back. And let's do that right now. And there you have it. Now, if your machine did not come with a needle threader, then you're going to have to manually feed your thread through the eye of the needle. So you'll do that and just pull it through. If your machine does have a needle threader, go ahead and pull down on the lever. You'll feed the thread through the left hook, then through the right hook, and release the lever, and it threads the needle for you. Then you'll just pull that to the left of the machine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this thread and we're going to feed it to the left of the opening on this presser foot, and I'll show you a close-up of that. On this foot, there's a groove, there's an opening to the left side. So we're going to feed the thread through that. Let's snap it back on and take the thread, feed it through the opening, and pull it to the back of the machine. Now let's go ahead and install our bobbin. To install your bobbin, first you're going to remove the bobbin cover. So you just press down on this lever and it snaps up. Then you're going to take your bobbin and you're going to install it with your thread to the left, and the thread needs to wind from this direction. You don't want to have your thread winding from this side. So make sure your thread is on the left, and you're going to drop it down into the bobbin case, and there's a groove there. And then you're going to take your thread, go under the groove, and pull to the left. Then you're going to take your top thread, which is threaded through your needle, hold it to the left. Then you're going to take your hand wheel and turn it toward you. And what's going to happen is this top thread is going to pull the bobbin thread up through the plate. So let's do that. Turn your hand wheel toward you all the way until that needle comes back up, and then stop. And then you're going to pull this thread, bring it through that groove, and then there you have your bobbin thread. Then you're going to take both threads, feed them back through that groove, and pull it to the back of your machine. Then go ahead and replace your cover, and you're ready to sew. Okay, looking at the top of page 2, you will see the sewing information. And here, highlighted in yellow, is the seam allowance. For this pattern, we will be sewing a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and those allowances are already included. So when you get ready to sew your pieces together, you will be using that 5/8 inch mark on your sewing machine needle plate that I showed you earlier. Moving down to the illustration key. This tells you what you will be looking at as far as your fabric and your linings when you're sewing the piece together. Now, for the first 2 blocks, this indicates what your fabric pieces will look like in the illustration. So if you are looking at a shaded picture, you will be looking at the right side of the fabric. If you're looking at a white picture, you'll be looking at the wrong side of the fabric. If you're looking at a dotted picture, it indicates interfacing. A picture with diagonal lines indicate lining. And for underlining, you'll have a picture with a series of lines that intersect each other. Now we don't have to worry about these three because for this skirt we will only be using a main fabric. Moving down to the next section, this will tell you how to finish off the edges and press your seams flat when you're sewing the garment together. This picture shows you or tells you that you will be trimming all enclosed seams into layers. The next one tells you to trim your corners by clipping the corners off. The next one teaches you to cut notches on the outer curves. And then finally, you will clip or make little clips on inner curves when you're sewing. Moving down to the next section is the glossary. Now when you're going along reading through your pattern instruction sheet and putting your garment together, you're going to run across words that are bold and in all capitals. That will indicate an instruction that you can find in the glossary. So whenever you see a letter that's in bold, you can come over here to the glossary and find the information on how to carry out that technique. Now we are ready to start stitching. So go ahead and get your machines ready for stitching. Thread, wind your bobbin, do all of that, and grab some scrap fabric because we're going to start practicing some stitches before we start working on our main garment pieces. I have my scrap piece of fabric, so let's start stitching. Now, go ahead and place your fabric right there for the time being. And let's make sure our settings are right on the sewing machine before we start stitching. We're going to do a straight stitch for our first practice. So go ahead and use your stitch selector and put it wherever your machine says to put it for a straight stitch. Then you want to make sure for your stitch length, you're at 2.5. For your stitch width, you're going to go anywhere between 2 and 3 or whatever number you need to be at to make sure this needle is right in the center of your the presser foot. Okay, and your thread tension should be somewhere in the middle. Mine is set at number 4. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our fabric in place and start practicing. So take your scrap fabric, place it under your presser foot, and line it up with the 5/8 inch line on your needle plate. Okay, do that. Then using your hand wheel, turn it towards you and insert the needle into the fabric all the way down. After you do that, go ahead and lower your presser foot. Now we're ready to sew. Now, using a very slow pace to start off with, go ahead and press down on your foot pedal, and you're going to sew from the beginning. I don't know how big your scrap piece is, but just enough stitches so you will be able to get an idea of what they look like. So I'll start and give you guys an idea. Okay, then you're going to stop. You will lift your presser foot and pull your fabric toward the back of the machine. If your machine has a thread cutter, go ahead and use the thread cutter. Or if your machine doesn't have a thread cutter, go ahead and use your little scissors or nippers and you can just cut your threads. And then if you take a close look at the stitches, those are perfect stitches. They work. And that's the top thread. I've used a pink thread on the bottom so that you can see the difference. And the bottom thread looks good. The top thread looks good. So that's a perfect setting for my machine for this fabric. Now I want to do that one more time, but this time I want to show you guys a back stitch. Now I'm going to start on this end and line it up with the 5/8 inch line on my needle plate. Insert the needle, lower the presser foot. Now I forgot to show you guys the back stitch or the reverse lever on my sewing machine. So it's over here to my right, and to sew in reverse I just press down that lever, press down on my foot pedal, sew a couple of stitches, let up off of my foot pedal and the lever. Okay, so to stitch in reverse, I just press that lever down. Now let's go back over to our sewing area. So I'm going to back stitch first. So I'm going to press down on the lever, sew a couple of stitches, stop, release the lever. You want to put your, or you want to sew forward. So press down on the foot pedal. Stop. Press down on the reverse knob. Press down. Stop. Lift your presser foot. Pull your fabric toward the back of the machine. Use your thread cutter. And let's look at that one. Which one was it? This one. Okay, at the beginning, you see we have a back stitch, and at the end we have a back stitch. And the back stitch is used to seal the end so that the thread doesn't come unraveled. Again, this is a very nice stitch on the front and on the back. Let's go ahead and practice a zigzag stitch. For a zigzag stitch on my machine, I will move my stitch selector to number 2, and I'm going to use just a regular zigzag stitch. Now, the length I'm keeping at 2.5, and the width I'm going to start off at 2, where it is right now, and we're going to do some different widths practicing this stitch. So let's go back over to the sewing area. Take your fabric, place it under the presser foot lined up against the 5/8 inch line. Lower the needle into the fabric, presser foot down. When you're sewing, make sure you're keeping your eye on the 5/8 inch line. Don't look at your needle, because you will not be able to get a straight line if you're looking at the needle. Make sure you keep your focus on that line where your fabric is, the edge of your fabric is. And that's going to be your guide to help you get straight stitches. Okay. Don't worry about the back stitch right now. We're just going to practice the zigzag. So let's start stitching. I'm going to go a little bit faster. Okay. Now, oops, didn't cut my bottom thread. Okay, this is a very nice zigzag stitch. And when you're stitching knit fabrics and you use that zigzag stitch, it stretches right along with your fabric, which is perfect. On the back, we have a nice zigzag. Now, let's do that again. Turn your fabric to another edge and insert the fabric. Let's try a stitch width of 4. Let's go to 4. All right, let's go ahead and try that one. Needle down, presser foot down, and sew. Take it out. And you get a wider zigzag. Okay, now when you're sewing together, on the back it's fine. When you're sewing together your knits, you're going to use a narrow zigzag stitch. So we're going to put it on a number 1 this time. So turn to a new edge, insert your fabric, change your stitch selector to your stitch width to number 1. Lower your needle, presser foot, and stitch. And there is your zigzag stitch on a number 1, and that's the one that's most common for sewing with knits. Okay, so those are the only 2 stitches that we will be using for this project. Oh, actually I need to show you a basting stitch. A basting stitch is what we use to hold 2 pieces of fabric together temporarily until we're ready to sew the pieces together permanently. Now, to set up for a basting stitch, you're going to change your stitch length to the highest number on your machine. Mine is a number 4. Okay, and we're doing a straight stitch for the basting stitch, so it's on number 1. Go ahead and insert your fabric. Lower your needle and presser foot and sew. When you're sewing a basting stitch, you never back stitch at the beginning or the end because that locks in the stitches and you don't want to lock in a basting stitch. So let's remove that. And you'll see with the basting stitch, you get longer stitches. Okay? So that's the front and the back. So that's it for your stitches. I want you to go ahead and practice your stitches before you start stitching onto your garment. Practice for as long as you need to practice. The main thing to remember is as you're stitching, I want you to keep your eye on your focal point, and that will be the guideline on your needle plate as you're sewing. So make sure the edge of your fabric is lined up with this guideline, and that's what you will look at. Do not look at the needle. Okay, let's go ahead and get some practice, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll start putting our skirt together. Let's start with our back pieces. You're going to go ahead and pin these two pieces together, and then we're going to stitch from the bottom edge of the skirt up to the top part. Starting at the bottom edge because we want to make sure we always have even edges on the bottom. So if for some reason the fabric crawls and you get to the end and it's not even, you'll still have an even hem so that when we get ready to press or sew up the hem, it'll be okay. So go ahead and take your pins and you're going to pin from the bottom to the top. Now I like to place my pins perpendicular to the edges of the fabric. That's just my preference. Some people like to place their pins parallel to the edges, and that's okay too. Just keep in mind, if you're placing your pins parallel to the edges, you want to place the ball of your pin or the edge of your pin in the direction away from the direction that you're sewing. So when you're sewing and the fabric is moving through, you want to be able to remove the pin as the needle comes toward that pin. You never want to sew over your pins because the needle or the pins can damage your machine. So go ahead and place your pins in your fabric. Go ahead and pin the area where the notches are to make sure that's even. And then I've already pinned the edge, so I'm going to put one pin in between. Use however many pins you need to be comfortable. Once you start sewing more, you will be more comfortable and you won't have to use as many pins. Okay, so that's all pinned together. We're going to go to the machine and start sewing on our 5/8 inch line. Okay, according to step number 2 in the instructions, we are going to stitch the center back seam of the skirt backs together from the lower edge to the large circle. Now, for us, because we're inserting an invisible zipper, we're going to stop about an inch before we hit that circle. So what I want you to do is grab your seam gauge, put it at the 1 inch mark, place the seam gauge here at that dot, and then make a mark right at the edge, 1 inch below that dot. And that's where we're going to stop our stitching. Okay, let's go ahead and insert the bottom edge of the skirt into the machine. And when you insert your fabric into the machine, you want to insert it just past this edge here. So go ahead and lower your needle and presser foot, making sure that the edge of your fabric is lined up with the 5/8 inch mark. You're going to take a few back stitches, so press your reverse button down, stop, and then you're going to sew forward. And when you get to the pin, make sure you remove it before you get to it. So I'm going to remove it right now. And then you just go ahead and sew at a pace that's comfortable for you. As you're sewing, don't pull or push the fabric through. let the feed dogs feed your fabric through for you. What you will do is, to make sure that you're staying on the 5/8 inch line, is just kind of hold your fabric in place. So as I sew, you'll see my hands holding the fabric in place. So if you need to use both hands, that's fine. If you're comfortable using just one hand to kind of make sure it's staying in place, that's fine. Just practice and find whatever is comfortable for you. So let's continue stitching. Press the release button, backstitch a few stitches. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put in a basting stitch from this point to the edge of our fabric. And the reason we're doing that is because we're installing an invisible zipper. Now, typically, if you're installing an invisible zipper, they have you to leave the seam open. But I like to do this to create a guide stitch or a guideline for pressing that seam. Or, yes, to pressing a fold in it, to give me a guideline for inserting the zipper. And I'll show you that. It may not make sense to you right now. So go ahead and change your stitch length to the highest number on your machine. Mine is a 4. And that's your basting stitch length. And you'll go ahead and sew all the way to the end of your fabric without back stitching. And you don't back stitch with the basting stitch, because a back stitch locks in your stitch, and we will be removing the basting stitch later. So go ahead and remove your fabric. Oop, don't know what happened there. Let's go ahead and use my snippers. Okay, so there we have our first stitch. Before we attach our skirt front and skirt back together, we need to attach the pocket pieces to the sides of the front and back. So we're going to start with the skirt back. So go ahead and grab your skirt back and all of your pocket pieces, and you're going to place your skirt back in front of you with the right side facing up. So you're looking at the right side of the side edge of your skirt back. Then you're going to take one of your pocket pieces, and with the right sides facing each other, you're going to take the pocket. This is the right side of the pocket. This is the right side of the skirt edge. So place this right on top and line up those edges even. You will notice on your pocket piece there are 2 dots. These dots are very important in the construction of inserting the pockets into the skirt. So this pocket piece that you were given, I gave this to you on the blog. It has the 2 X's here. And if you did not transfer these onto your pocket pieces during the layout and cutting step, then you're going to need to go ahead and do that before going any further. Okay, so if you haven't done it, go ahead and take care of that. Now go ahead and take your pins and pin the sides together. I'm going to place 3 pins. You place however many you need to be comfortable. Then what we're going to do at the sewing machine is we're going to place or put in a 3/8 inch seam from top to the bottom. Now go ahead and place the edge of your fabric on the 3/8 inch line on your needle plate. If your 3/8 inch line is not marked, then I'll show you how to find it using your seam gauge. Okay, this is your seam gauge, and it is broken up into inches. You'll see here it goes up to 6 inches. Within each inch there are 1/8 inch marks. So to find the 3/8 inch mark, you just count from the left edge of the seam gauge over 3 spaces, 3 lines. So 1, 2, 3. And that 3rd line is your 3/8 inch mark. So you're going to move the slider over to that line, and then you're going to take your seam gauge, lining up the slider with the middle of your presser foot and your needle, and wherever that line is, or wherever the edge of your seam gauge is, that will be your 3/8 inch line. So the marker is here, the slider is here, and the edge of your seam gauge is right there. So that will be your 3/8 inch line. And you will just line up your fabric right there. With your stitch selector on a single stitch, go ahead and lower your needle, lower your presser foot, and we're going to sew a 3/8 inch seam from the top of the pocket to the edge of the pocket. Back stitch first. Back stitch. And there you have the first pocket piece installed. Now I want you to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side of your back piece, and then your last two pocket pieces, go ahead and do the same thing to attach those to your skirt front sides, and then meet me back here at the sewing machine. Now that you have inserted your pocket pieces, this is what it should look like. This is our skirt back, and your pocket pieces should be sewn on to the right side of the fabric with right side spacing. And your front piece should look the same. This is your front piece. Okay, now we're going to go to the ironing station and press our pocket seams. Now with our skirt back piece on the ironing board, we're ready to press the pocket seams. But before we do that, I want you to go ahead and check the water tank on your iron and make sure that it's full. If not, put more water in. And then you're going to take your iron and press these seams flat. Remember, don't forget to use your press cloth. And the reason we press the seams flat before pressing them open or to one side or the other is to seal the threads in with the fabric. So go ahead and take your press cloth and cover your seam. And then take your iron and press. Same thing on the other side. Then you're going to turn the skirt over to the wrong side and do the same thing. Making sure that pocket piece is flat under there. Don't forget your press cloth. Now you're going to take one side of the skirt and place it on the ironing board just like this. And we're going to this time press the seam toward the pocket. Okay? Take your press cloth, make sure that it's going toward the pocket, and press. Turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. Pushing toward the pocket to make sure you don't have any folds. And press. You're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side of your back piece. Then do the same thing on both sides of your front skirt piece. Then we're going to meet at the sewing machine. With your skirt back piece laying out flat in front of you with the right side facing up and your pocket piece extending out, go ahead and take your skirt front piece and you're going to place it on top of your skirt back piece with the right sides of the fabric facing. So this is the right side of my pocket piece on the front. I'm going to take it and lie it on top of the back pocket piece. And we're going to line up the edges. Line up this corner with the pocket piece and line up that top piece. Then we're going to pin. Place one at the bottom. Then go ahead and place one right here in this corner, making sure that the edges are even. Then we're going to go to the top and place a pin. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that these seams are lined up before we pin. So the seam for the skirt front and the back where that pocket meets, line that up. And then you're going to place a pin. And if you like, you can go ahead and put one more here. Now, remember when we installed the pocket pieces, there was a dot on the pocket, but we can't see it now, and we need to see that dot because we need to know where to end our stitching at the bottom of the pocket and at the top of our pocket. So we need to go find those dots and transfer them onto this piece, onto this back side of the fabric. So taking a straight pin, I want you to take the seam and turn it back, and there's the dot. So you're going to take the pin, insert it through the dot, and bring it out through this side. Then I want you to take your seam gauge and find your 5/8 inch mark. And remember, count over from the left, 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And put your slider right there. Place your seam gauge onto your fabric. Move your pin back. And that's where you're going to place the dot. And we're going to do the same thing over here. Find the dot, insert the pin, bring it out on the other side of the fabric. And now we're ready to sew our side seam. So what we're going to do at the machine is sew from the bottom of the skirt and a 5/8 inch seam all the way up to this dot. Then we're going to stop. We're going to extend the thread all the way over to this dot. We're going to start stitching again, beginning with a back stitch, go to the edge, back stitch, and then we'll be done with this seam. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, before we start stitching, let's make sure we have the proper settings. So your stitch indicator will be a straight stitch, 1 on my machine. Your stitch length will be 2.5, and your stitch width will be somewhere between 2 and 3 to make sure your needle is in the center of the presser foot. So let's go ahead and stitch, making sure that the edge of your fabric is on the 5/8 inch line, and you'll use that as your focal point. And remove your pins as you sew, starting with the back stitch. When you come to this point, you won't be able to see your focal point anymore. However, the edge of your fabric should be lined up here with the edge of this seam. So keep sewing to this dot and then stop. And backstitch. Lift your machine needle. Lift your presser foot, and we're going to pull down to the next dot. Line up your fabric, make sure everything is in place. Wherever that dot is, the edge of your presser foot, the right edge, should be on the seam line. Lower your needle, your presser foot. Do a couple of stitches forward, then back stitch a couple, and sew to the end, to the edge of this fabric, and back stitch. Now, we extended the thread to go to that next dot. We need to go and clip this thread on both sides of the fabric. So take your snips or your little scissors and just clip that. Now we're going to go and sew around the edges of your pocket piece. So go ahead and insert your pocket, or insert your fabric, starting at the bottom of the pocket. So here I have, I'm sorry, I have that the wrong way. No, I have it the right way. Insert it with the pocket at the bottom. And the top edge of your skirt will be over to the left this time. Now, starting at the 5/8 inch mark, you're going to sew around the pocket piece. And the way you're going to find your 5/8 inch mark is you're going to look up under your skirt piece. You're starting your stitching at this line of stitching. So go ahead and find that, and then look under the fabric to find your 5/8 inch line, and you're going to line this pocket piece up with that 5/8 inch line. So you're going to have to move it over until you see the 5/8 inch mark, the line, and that's where you want to start. Okay, so with the edge of your pocket on that line, move it down to that line of stitching and lower your needle and your presser foot. And then your 5/8 inch line will be your guide. I forgot to tell you to insert your pins, so make sure you do that before you insert your fabric, or you can do it right here. Insert your pins just for control, making sure that the edges of your fabric are even. Okay. And you're going to be sewing a curve, because as you can see, this edge is curved. So you are going to have to control the fabric and turn it as you're sewing. So I'm going to go slow on this part so you can see how I do it, and then you can follow. I'm right at the edge, so I'm going to sew a couple of stitches forward, and then I'm going to do my back stitch. And what I'm doing as I come to this curve is I'm just kind of guiding the fabric with my hands. Just make sure as you're manipulating the fabric on this curve that you're going at a slow pace. And then once you get back on a straight edge, then you can just speed up if you like. And when you get to the end, you're going to backstitch. And there you have your pocket piece sewn. You're going to go ahead and do the same thing to the other pocket piece. Now that we have sewn the pockets onto the skirt, this is what your skirt should look like. You have your pockets closed, and we're looking at the back side of the skirt. And the next step that we need to take is we need to clip this back seam allowance below the pocket, but the back seam allowance only. And we're going to do the same thing on both sides. And the reason we're doing that is because this pocket needs to fold over to the front of the skirt without carrying this back seam allowance with it. So I'll demonstrate that. Go ahead and turn your skirt. Grab your fabric scissors, and we're going to clip from the edge to just before the seams, making sure not to cut into the seams. And now, when you fold your pocket piece to the front, you will still be able to open out your back seam allowance. So go ahead and clip your back seam allowance on both sides, and then we're going to go to the ironing board to press our seam. Okay, lay out your skirt side piece onto your ironing board the way you see mine laid out here, and I'm looking at the back side of my skirt. You're going to take your iron. Don't forget your press cloth. Lie your press cloth on top of your stitches and then just press. Making sure to get the pocket edges. Flip it over. And you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Make sure you have your steam setting on so that you get a nice press. After you have pressed it flat on both sides, you're going to take your skirt, open it out, and place that side seam on top of your ironing board, and the rest of your skirt will hang under. Now, your pocket piece, you want to turn it toward the front of the skirt. And the way you're going to know what the front is you can check two ways. You can look at the top edge, and there is a single notch. On the back of the skirt, you'll have a double notch. So you want to turn your pocket toward the front of the skirt. And we're going to keep that flat, but we're going to open out the seam allowances below the pocket. So grab your press cloth, place it down, and to make sure this is flat, go ahead and with one hand hold the seam open, with the other hand just press or fold your cloth onto that seam. Pull it down. Take your iron and press it flat. You're going to turn it over to the other side, to the front side, turning your skirt inside out, and do the same thing, making sure that your pocket piece is turned toward the front of your skirt. Making sure your pocket piece is flat under the skirt as well, and that you have this nice fold where the pocket piece is. Okay? Put your pressing cloth and go ahead and press, making sure that this seam allowance is open and that you're not getting any wrinkles. And there you have a nice neat seam. You're going to do the same thing on the other side front piece, and for your back seam you're going to do the same thing. However, you're going to press the entire back seam open. Before going to the sewing machine, I want to have you prepare your zipper. So what you're going to do is take your zipper and open it out, open it all the way, and place it face down onto your ironing board. And what we're going to do is we're going to press this open. The teeth of this zipper are folded over onto the zipper tape, and what we need to do is open it out to apply it to our garment. So you're going to take your ironing board or your iron, and with the tip of the iron you're going to place it on the edge here, hold on to your zipper, applying pressure. You're going to fold or press it open, and you're just going to move the iron along the teeth, being careful not to place the iron on top of the teeth, just moving it along, holding the edge of the zipper with your other hand until you get to the end and stop. Then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Open it out, place your iron, the tip of your iron, and just follow that curve, pressing that fold open by applying pressure and moving the iron along the zipper tape until you get to the end and stop. Now your zipper is ready to be applied to your skirt.